Hi everybody, I'm delighted to be with you today to discuss the new SFC book building conduct requirements for issuers and intermediaries involved in book building and placing activities under the SFC's Code of Conduct, which came into effect on the 5th of August 2022. I'll talk about these as the book building conduct requirements in this webinar. I'll also be discussing the amendments to the main board and GEM listing rules that the Hong Kong Exchange has introduced to complement the book building conduct requirements as set out in their information paper dated the 22nd of April 2022. We'll begin today by looking at an overview of the SFC's concerns relating to Hong Kong book building and placing activities and the market practices which led to the new book building conduct requirements. We'll then look at a summary of the key features of the new book building conduct requirements and discuss the amendments to the listing rules to complement those requirements, which will apply to new listing applications made on or after the 5th of August 2022. We'll then close the webinar with a discussion of the other amendments made to the listing rules not related to the book building conduct requirements and the transitional arrangements in place for issuers. In February 2021, the SFC published a consultation paper with two main proposals. The first was a proposal to introduce a new code of conduct requirements for intermediaries conducting book building and placing activities in equity capital market and debt capital market transactions in Hong Kong, in particular to clarify the roles played by intermediaries in these transactions and to set out the standards of conduct expected of them in Hong Kong book building, pricing, allocation and placing activities. The second was the sponsor coupling proposal, which would require at least one head of the underwriting syndicate of main board IPOs or a company within the same group to act as an independent sponsor to the IPO. The SFC reviewed the conduct of licensed intermediaries engaged in book building and placing activities of equity and debt capital markets and also engaged in discussions with market participants. The SFC found that in some offerings, in their view, the price discovery process had been hampered by various factors such as inflated or opaque demand. The SFC identified cases of what it considered to be undesirable intermediary conduct, such as brokers without a mandate swarming order books at the last minute with orders of what the SFC referred to as unknown quality, which may be price insensitive orders from corporate and individuals. The SFC's review also identified some good practices in the market, which they'd codified in the book building conduct requirements. The SFC also found that sponsors' fees are often misaligned with sponsors' costs and liabilities, particularly in larger IPOs. According to the SFC, this raises concerns that IPO sponsors may compromise their due diligence work to become the head of the underwriting syndicate and thereby earn much higher underwriting fees in order to compensate for sponsor costs, responsibilities, and potential liability. Price discovery in Hong Kong is conducted by way of book building, which the SFC considers would serve the interests of both issuers and investors if conducted transparently and fairly. The SFC said in its consultation paper that competitive pressures have led intermediaries to engage in conduct which often tips the scale in favor of issuers. This, it claimed, can distort the price discovery process and the allocation of equity and debt offerings. Through its thematic review, the SFC identified a number of concerns with the book building and allocation process in Hong Kong, including, among other things, that there were unclear roles and functions of various intermediaries and that fee arrangements and syndicate memberships were often being determined at a late stage, sometimes only shortly before the publication of the IPO prospectus or shortly before book close for debt offerings. The SFC was also concerned that there was a lack of transparency of the order book, which prevented syndicate heads from assessing real demand or identifying unusual or irregular orders. Moving on, in May 2021, the SFC and the Stock Exchange issued a joint statement on IPO-related misconduct, which set out issues they identified in recent listing applications. This included an increasing number of ramp and dump schemes in IPOs, particularly in IPOs of companies with smaller market capitalizations. Ramp and dump schemes are a form of market manipulation often conducted via social media, where fraudsters use various methods to inflate the share price to induce investors to buy the shares and subsequently dump the shares at an artificially high price before the share price eventually drops far below its IPO price. The regulators suspected that some of these schemes were initiated at the IPO stage with a view to manipulating the share price later. shares are often allocated in the placing tranche to controlled accounts funded by unusually high underwriting commissions or other listing expenses. After an initial rise in the share price after listing, the share price often dropped significantly. The SFC noted that the placing tranche was also used to allocate IPO shares to controlled placees in order to artificially meet the stock exchange's listing requirements or to facilitate market manipulation post-listing. It also pointed to the lack of a robust and transparent share placement and price discovery process as contributing to the difficulty in identifying suspicious cases. The SFC also observed that the payment of unusually high underwriting commissions was often a feature of problematic IPOs in recent years. The average underwriting commission rate for IPOs with a market capitalization of less than 600 million reportedly rose to 12% in 2020 from around 4% in 2017. The SFC suspected that high underwriting commissions were used to fund arrangements aimed at satisfying the stock exchange's listing rule requirements, including the minimum market cap, sufficient investor interest, and adequate spread of shareholder requirements, or carrying out ramp and dump schemes. Commissions may, for example, have been used to fund rebates paid to controlled placees for having subscribed for shares at an inflated price. Listing applicants' payment of substantial amounts of additional discretionary listing expenses after listing was also highlighted as suspicious. As a result of the issues identified by the regulators in October 2021, the SFC published its consultation conclusions for the book building conduct requirements and gave a 9-month transition period for intermediaries to implement the requisite operational and system changes to comply with the new requirements. On the 22nd of April 2022, the Stock Exchange published an information paper outlining the amendments on both the main board and GEM listing rules being introduced to complement the new book building conduct requirements. These listing rule amendments will apply to listing applications filed on or after the 5th of August 2022 for specified types of placings. To address the issues identified by the regulators and to align incentives with the responsibilities of intermediaries, the SFC developed the new book building conduct requirements, which imposed various obligations and expected standards of conduct on intermediaries involved in Hong Kong book building and placing activities. The relevant requirements on these intermediaries, who are referred to as capital market intermediaries or CMIs, as set out in a new paragraph 21 of the Code of Conduct for persons licensed or registered with the SFC. As an overview, these book building conduct requirements cover ensuring transparency in the book building process and imposing requirements for the implementation of allocation policy to ensure fair allocation of securities to investor clients, prohibiting the offering of rebates to investor clients and restricting investor clients from paying for securities at a price lower than that disclosed in listing documents, and maintaining policies and procedures for the identification, management and disclosure of conflicts of interest, and requiring the giving of priority towards satisfying investor clients' orders over CMI's proprietary orders. Further, prior to conducting any book building or placing activities, CMIs will be required to be formally appointed under written agreements, setting out their roles, responsibilities, fee arrangements and fee payment schedules. For main board IPOs, sponsor coupling is required, which means that at least one overall coordinator or OC must also be appointed as a sponsor or be a member of the sponsor's group of companies, and this sponsor must be independent of the issuer. OCs are the heads of syndicates and are a type of CMI. They must also provide advice to the issuer client on marketing strategy, pricing and allocation, and ensure transparency in the price discovery process. There are also requirements for fee arrangements to be determined at an early stage and OCs to be appointed at an early stage. I'll now move to discuss the book building conduct requirements in more detail. The book building conduct requirements will apply to CMIs that engage in providing services to issuers and/or investors which are involved in the following capital market activities conducted in Hong Kong. Firstly, book building, namely collating investors' orders, including indications of interest in an offering in order to facilitate the price determination and the allocation of shares or debt securities to investors, or the process of assessing demand and making allocations. Secondly, placing activities involving the marketing or distributing of shares or debt securities to investors pursuant to book building activities. And thirdly, advising, guiding, and assisting the issuer client in Hong Kong, book building and placing activities. CMIs subject to book building conduct requirements will not include financial advisors or other professionals who only provide advice to the issuer but do not participate in any book building or placing activities. The book building conduct requirements cover certain types of share and debt offerings that involve Hong Kong book building activities. Offerings of shares listed or to be listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, including IPOs, including share offerings in connection with a secondary listing and an offer of existing shares by way of IPO, offerings of a class of shares new to listing, offerings of new shares of a class already listed under a general or specific mandate, the placing of listed shares to third-party investors by an existing shareholder that's accompanied by a top-up subscription by the existing shareholder for new shares in the issuer, offerings of debt securities, listed or unlisted, offered in Hong Kong or otherwise, but offerings which do not involve book building activities are not within the scope of the new requirements. A CMI will be classified as either a syndicate CMI or a non-syndicate CMI, depending on whether it has a mandate and a direct relationship with the issuer. A CMI which is directly engaged by the issuer of a share or debt offering will be referred to as a syndicate CMI. Examples of titles or roles currently associated with syndicate CMIs include, in the case of senior syndicate CMIs, global coordinators, book runners or lead managers, and in the case of less senior syndicate CMIs, co-managers and placing agents. A CMI which is not directly engaged by the issuer of a share or debt offering will be referred to as a non-syndicate CMI. Examples of titles or roles currently associated with non-syndicate CMIs include sub-placing agents engaged by syndicate CMIs or other non-syndicate CMIs for the placing of shares or debt securities, and brokers which only collate orders received from their investor clients, place them with the syndicate CMIs, and distribute the securities to their clients if they receive allocations from the syndicate CMIs. Heads of syndicates for offerings are referred to as overall coordinators or OCs, and they will be identified solely by reference to the activities they carry out rather than by their titles. For a share offering, an OC is a syndicate CMI, which is typically referred to as global coordinators or lead managers who are solely or jointly with other OCs. It's responsible for the overall management for the offering, coordinating the book building or placing activities conducted by other CMIs, exercising control over book building activities, and making allocation recommendations to the issuer client. Advising the issuer client of the offer price and being a party to the price determination agreement with the issuer client, and exercising discretion in respect of reallocating shares between the placing tranche and public subscription tranche, or in respect of any reduction in the number of offer shares, or in the exercise of an upsize or an over-allotment option. In the case of a debt offering, an OC is a syndicate CMI, which solely or jointly with other OCs conducts the overall management of the offering, coordinates the book building or placing activities conducted by other CMIs, exercises control over book building activities, and makes pricing or allocation recommendations to the issuer client. Turning now to the obligations and standards of conduct as set out in the SFC's Code of Conduct. The obligations and expected standards of conduct or baseline requirements that are applicable to all CMIs, including OCs, are set out in paragraph 21.3 of the SFC's Code of Conduct. They include, without limitation, requirement for assessment of the issuer client and investor clients, requirements concerning early appointment of CMIs as well as determination of fee arrangements, requirements regarding ensuring the order book reflects bona fide demand, requirement concerning ensuring fair allocation. There's a restriction on offering of rebate and preferential treatment, record-keeping requirements, requirements to put in place procedures for identification and management of conflicts of interest. Paragraph 21.4 of the SFC Code of Conduct sets out the additional requirements which are applicable to OCs only. These include requirement for an early appointment and determination of fee arrangements of OCs, including a sponsor OC for main board listings, requirements concerning how to advise issuers, requirements on how to devise a marketing plan, requirements to ensure credible and transparency in the price discovery process. Whilst it's not possible for me to go through all these requirements today, I'll go through some of these key obligations and requirements in the next few slides. After that, I'll talk about the amendments made to the listing rules that reflect these obligations. Paragraph 21.3.1 of the SFC Code of Conduct says that all CMIs to a share or debt offering will be required to conduct an adequate assessment of an issuer before engaging in the offering. This will include taking reasonable steps to obtain an accurate understanding of the issuer client's history, background, business and performance, financial conditions and prospects, operations and structure. Where the CMI for a debt offering had been the CMI for a previous debt offering made by the same issuer, the CMI will instead be required to ascertain whether there have been any material changes in the issuer client's circumstances of relevance to their role as a CMI. CMIs will also be required to establish a formal governance process for the review and assessment of the offering, including any actual or potential conflicts of interest between the CMI and the issuer client and the associated risks. Before CMIs conduct any book building or placing activities, and before an OC conducts activities typically conducted by global coordinators or lead managers, they must have been formally appointed by the issuer or another CMI in the case of a non-syndicate CMI, under a written agreement to conduct such activities. The written agreement should clearly specify the roles and responsibilities of the CMI, the fee arrangements and the fee payment schedule. For main board IPOs, at least one sponsor or a member of its group companies which is independent of the listing applicant must be appointed as an OC for the IPO at least 2 months before the filing of the listing application. This is referred to as sponsor coupling in the SFC consultation, and it's intended that such a small group of identified senior syndicate members are identified and known to other CMI syndicate members at the outset, and they would be primarily accountable for the IPO and the provision of accurate, reliable and consistent information and advice throughout the listing process. And to alleviate concerns that if sponsors are not appointed as a head of the syndicate from the outset, they may be incentivized to compromise due diligence to secure the appointment, given associated fees from such appointment. For other OCs who are not sponsors to an IPO, and for OCs of GEM IPOs, their appointment must be made no later than 2 weeks after the listing application submission. The list of all OCs and their fee arrangements, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, will need to be provided to the SFC by no later than 4 business days prior to the listing committee hearing to allow the committee to make inquiries. These requirements for early appointment of OCs aim to ensure that OCs are given sufficient time to understand the issuer, develop marketing, pricing and allocation strategies, and properly coordinate activities of other syndicate CMIs in the offering. These requirements are not applicable to syndicate CMIs who are not OCs. For these non-OC syndicate CMIs, they would only be required to be appointed and their fixed fees agreed prior to conducting any of the book building and placing activities. This is to provide for flexibility in the light of the SFC's concerns that issuers might need to appoint more syndicate CMIs at a later stage to reward last-minute marketing efforts, in particular for IPOs which are not popular or in a poor market environment, to ensure the success of an offering, and non-OC syndicate CMIs would typically not commit before the result of the listing committee hearing is known. This is particularly the case for smaller IPOs, given the uncertainty of obtaining listing approval and the vagaries of market sentiment. The fee arrangements in an engagement agreement with each CMI, including each OC, must include fixed fees as a percentage of the total fees, including fixed and discretionary fees, to be paid to all syndicate CMIs participating in the offering. That's the fee split ratio. These are often referred to as underwriting fees in the industry. The total fee should include all fees for providing advice to the issuer, marketing, book building, making pricing and allocation recommendations, and placing these securities with investor clients. Fixed fees means the minimum amount of fees payable to the CMI, which is not subject to the discretion of the issuer, other than due to changes in the offer size or offer price, and any other fees which are payable as part of the total fees, which would be considered discretionary fees. Any fixed fee entitlement that is expressed in the agreement to be subject to the discretion of the issuer will be regarded as discretionary fees. The intention of these requirements for a fixed fee entitlement for each syndicate CMI to be determined at an early stage at the time of their appointment is that they may properly focus their efforts and devote their resources to providing advice and conducting book building and placing activities in compliance with the new requirements. This is expected to enhance transparency and credibility in the price discovery and allocation process. This requirement would invariably necessitate the issuer to decide, prior to engaging the first syndicate CMI, the total fixed fees payable to all syndicate CMIs, and the total discretionary fees, if any, that may be paid to syndicate CMIs as a percentage of gross proceeds to be raised in the offering. An OC participating in a share offering is required to provide guidance to the issuer on the fee arrangements, including the market practice on the ratio of fixed and discretionary fees to be paid to syndicate CMIs. It's stated in the SFC consultation conclusion that this is 75% fixed and 25% discretionary. For example, 3% fixed fees with discretion to offer a further 1%. Issuers are required to assess whether they should deviate significantly from this 75-25% ratio, and the SFC may make inquiries on any deviation from this ratio, following reporting to it 4 clear business days prior to the listing committee hearing. Under FAQ 10A on consequential changes to the listing rules to complement the new Code of Conduct provisions on book building and placing activities published by the Stock Exchange, it's said that if a syndicate CMI's fixed fee entitlement is expressed no less than X% of the total fees, any fees above X% would be regarded as discretionary fees. No more than X% of the total fees. There's no certainty as to the minimum amount of fee that the CMI may get after rendering the specified services, and all that fee is accordingly discretionary. This doesn't comply with the relevant requirements and isn't allowed. A percentage range of the total fees. The minimum fee prescribed by the range would be regarded as the fixed fees of the CMI, while any additional fees within the range would be regarded as its discretionary fees. Where the fee arrangement is expressed in the form of a tiered commission structure, where a higher commission rate will apply when the deal is priced higher, the minimum fee prescribed by the tiered commission structure would be regarded as the fixed fees of the CMI, whereas any fees above that minimum fee would be regarded as discretionary fees. This fee arrangement should be clearly disclosed in the IPO listing document. Discretionary fee entitlement, on the other hand, can be expressed with language such as up to and no less than a particular percentage. In practice, we've received feedback that the new requirements concerning the determination of fee arrangements do pose a challenge for sponsor OCs who are required to be appointed at least 2 months prior to filing of the listing application, as they necessitate the carrying out of a substantive assessment on the issuer and forming a view on their commitment to underwrite prior to being formally appointed as sponsor to conduct due diligence on the issuer and its business. An issuer may be reluctant to agree a material fixed fee for smaller sponsor OCs without a substantive track record in book building and placing, even in relatively small IPOs, where these sponsor OCs are willing to use resources and are capable of underwriting larger proportions of the offering. The 75-25% fee split ratio that's regarded as market practice also leaves limited flexibility for sponsor OCs to be rewarded out of discretionary fees, even where they subsequently underwrite all or a significant portion of the book. The SFC consultation conclusion says that the fee split ratio must be reported to the SFC by no later than 4 clear business days prior to the listing committee hearing, which the SFC considers to be a relatively late stage of the IPO. Any subsequent changes to the ratio must be notified to the SFC. However, it's not clear whether the fixed fee entitlement of a sponsor OC or the fee split ratio stated in the engagement letter, which is provided to the stock exchange 2 months prior to the listing, could be changed without any notification or approval. Given the practical issues which I've mentioned, some sponsor OCs are questioning whether it may be possible to put nominal fixed fees in their engagement letter, with a view to this being amended at a later stage of the IPO. This, however, seems to be contrary to the spirit of the new requirements, and it remains to be seen whether the regulators may raise issues where this has actually happened. OCs, being overall in charge, are regarded as being in the best position to advise the issuer, and should be held accountable for advising on the offer price and making allocation recommendations. An OC will be required to act with due skill, care and diligence when providing advice, recommendations and guidance to clients, including in respect of marketing strategy, pricing and allocation. Its advice and recommendations should be balanced and based on thorough analysis and should take into account the preferences and objectives of the issuer with respect to pricing and desired shareholder or investor base, which they should gain an understanding of through engagement with the issuer. An OC should also explain its allocation policy and recommendations, as well as key factors which could influence pricing outcome. These obligations would act towards reducing incidents of OCs favouring preferred clients on hot IPOs, as well as a risk of underpricing to enable investor clients to subscribe at a lower cost against the interests of the issuer. OCs will also be required to advise and guide the issuer and its directors as to their responsibilities under the stock exchange's requirements which apply to placing activities, and take reasonable steps to ensure that they understand and meet these responsibilities, and of any decisions against OC's advice and recommendations which may lead to a lack of an open market or which may negatively affect the orderly and fair trading of shares on the secondary market. As discussed, an OC should devise a marketing and investor targeting strategy for order generation based on discussions with issuers regarding their preference and objectives concerning the shareholder or investor base. This strategy should specify the types of investors targeted, such as institutional pension funds, hedge funds, family offices, high net worth and other retail individuals, including cornerstone investors for an IPO, and the portion of offering to be allocated to each type of investor. The OCs may advise the issuer on necessary adjustment to their marketing strategy in response to changing market conditions and sentiment, and this should be communicated to all syndicate CMIs. CMIs are required under the new requirements to assess whether their investor clients fall within the types of investors targeted in the market strategy formulated, and should only market to investor clients who are targeted investors. For a share offering, where the shares are only marketed to selected investor clients based on their suitability and investment preference, the CMI should be satisfied that the shares are being marketed to a sufficient number of clients and the likelihood of undue concentration of holdings is reasonably low. A CMI should generally allow all of its investor clients, which are targeted investors and have indicated an interest in an offering, to participate in that offering. In addition, OCs are required to provide all syndicate CMIs of an IPO with a list of issuers' directors, existing shareholders, close associates and nominees engaged by them concerning the offering, and to take reasonable steps to identify investors who are these people to ensure allocation to them in accordance with requirements of the stock exchange. Under the new book building requirements, CMIs should also take reasonable steps to ensure that all orders, including indications of interest in the order book, represent bona fide demand on behalf of investor clients, itself and its group companies. They must make inquiries with investor clients about orders which appear unusual, for example, which are not commensurate with their financial profile prior to placing the order. CMIs are required to ensure transparency in the book building process and are required to disclose the identities of all investor clients in an order book, except those placed on an omnibus basis. For orders placed on an omnibus basis, the CMI will be required to provide information, such as the name and unique identification number, about the underlying investors to the OC and the issuer client when placing orders. However, client poaching would not be allowed, meaning that OCs may not use client information provided by syndicate CMIs for purposes other than for the specific offering. With overall responsibilities for managing the book building exercise and having been provided with investor client information from other syndicate CMIs, OCs are required to take reasonable steps to properly manage an order book and ensure the book's transparency, including ensuring that the identities of all investor clients are disclosed in the order book, apart from orders placed on an omnibus basis. Properly consolidating orders in the order book by taking reasonable steps to identify and eliminate duplicated orders, inconsistencies or errors. Segregating and clearly identifying in the order book and book messages any proprietary orders of CMIs and their group companies, and making inquiries with CMIs which have placed orders on behalf of their investor clients themselves or their group companies which appear unusual or irregular, such as orders which appear to be related to the issuer client. In respect of pricing and allocation, CMIs are required to establish and implement an allocation policy to ensure a fair allocation of shares or debt securities to investor clients. Such an allocation policy is expected to be general and broadly suited for most share and debt offerings and should take into account the principles of the book building conduct requirements on conflicts of interest and proprietary orders. Taking into account factors including without limitation the formulated marketing and investor targeting strategy, the order size and the circumstances of an investor client, price limits on investor client orders, minimum allocation amounts indicated by investor clients, and so on. Prevent practices which may result in unfair treatment of investor clients or knowingly distort demand. OCs are required to take all reasonable steps to ensure that the price discovery process is credible and transparent and that the allocation recommendations made to the issuer client as well as the final allocation have a proper basis. Under the relevant codes, OCs are required to advise the issuer on pricing with reference to the results of the book building, prevailing market conditions and characteristics of the issuer. Ensure that the proprietary orders for CMIs or their group companies will not negatively impact the price discovery process, and develop and maintain an allocation policy which specifies the criteria for making allocation recommendations to the issuer client, taking into account the issuer's objectives and preference, prevailing market conditions, spread of investors, and overall subscription rate for the offer. Under the new book building requirements, CMIs are prohibited from offering any rebates to investor clients, including passing any rebates provided by the issuer. CMIs are not permitted to enable any investor clients to pay at a lower price than that offered to other investors. For example, any amount less than the total consideration as disclosed in the listing document in an IPO. CMIs are required to disclose to the issuer client, the OC, all of its targeted investors and the non-syndicate CMIs it appoints, any rebates offered to and/or any other preferential treatment, such as guaranteed allocations given to any CMI or targeted investors. In addition, OCs are required to advise the issuer and inform other syndicate CMIs of the disclosure of any rebates and preferential treatment. Throughout the offering, CMIs will receive information from the issuer, OCs, other CMIs, and its investor clients, which would materially affect the offering, including information about the offer price and the ways in which the OC and CMIs should discharge their responsibilities. CMIs are required to disclose complete and accurate information in a timely fashion on the status of the order book and other relevant information it receives to the OC, other CMIs, and targeted investors. OCs are required to inform other syndicate CMIs of the issuer's client marketing and investor targeting strategy and disseminate material information related to the offering and ensure that the disseminated information is complete and accurate and has a proper basis. In terms of record keeping, CMIs are required to maintain books and records sufficient to demonstrate compliance with all applicable requirements under the book building conduct requirements. They must maintain these records for at least 7 years, except for audit trails, which only required 2 years. OCs are required to document various matters, including all changes in the order book throughout the book building process and all key discussions with and key advice or recommendations provided to the issuer client. They must maintain these records for at least 7 years. In addition to general requirements under the SFC Code of Conduct to avoid conflicts of interest under the new requirements, CMIs are required to establish, implement, and maintain policies and procedures to identify, manage, and disclose actual and potential conflicts of interest which may arise over the book building process. For example, where a CMI has discretion over allocations to investor clients or a proprietary order or services investor clients when having a proprietary interest. Always give priority to fulfilling investor clients' orders over their own proprietary orders and those of their group companies. Ensure that proprietary orders would not negatively impact the price discovery process and only be a price taker in relation to proprietary orders or those of its group companies, and segregate and clearly identify their own proprietary orders in the order book and book messages. For such purposes, proprietary orders include syndicate CMI members' treasury functions for managing its capital, but do not include orders from their asset management arm placed on behalf of investor clients or funds and portfolios under management, as these are considered to represent genuine demand and therefore should not be treated pari passu with other client orders, i.e. not treated as lower priority and not as a price taker, on the condition that they're placed on an arm's length basis. They don't have substantial interest in the relevant funds or portfolios, and effective Chinese wall controls are in place. For a debt offering, CMIs will be required to take reasonable steps to disclose to the issuer client how any risk management transactions it intends to conduct for itself, the issuer client, or its investor clients will not impact the debt securities pricing. General Principle 3 of the SFC Code of Conduct provides that an intermediary should have and effectively employ the resources and procedures which are needed for the proper performance of their business activities. The book building conduct requirements build on this principle by setting out provisions for specific requirements relating to having effective Chinese walls to prevent flow of price-sensitive or confidential information to unintended staff, review and approve certain orders and allocations, for example, in respect of proprietary orders of CMIs or group companies, or unusual investor orders which appear not to be commensurate with the profile of the investor or which appear to be related to the issuer. The exercise of due care, skill and diligence in selecting and appointing non-syndicate CMIs. Conduct appropriate surveillance and monitoring to detect irregularities, conflicts of interest, leakage of confidential information, for example, through review of book messages and electronic communications. OCs are required to report on a timely basis various information to the SFC, including any instances of material non-compliance with the listing rules related to, for example, the placing activities conducted by itself or the issuer client, and any material changes to the information it previously provided to the SFC and the stock exchange. This reporting requirement includes, in the case of a share offering, any decisions made by the issuer client that amount to any material non-compliance with the listing rules. Further, in order to assist with the identification of arrangements that substantially differ from market norms, OCs are required to provide certain information to the SFC by no later than 4 clear business days prior to the listing committee hearing for an IPO. This information includes the name of each OC participating in the IPO, the allocation of the fixed portion of the fees paid by the issuer to each OC, the total fees as a percentage of the gross amount of funds raised of both the public offer and the international tranche to be paid to all syndicate CMIs, and the fee split ratio, the ratio between the fixed and discretionary portions of the total fees to be paid to all syndicate CMIs in percentage terms. The OC should notify the SFC as soon as practicable of any material changes to any of this information. Other CMIs are required to deal with the SFC and stock exchange in an open and cooperative manner and to provide all relevant information and explanations as required under applicable legal or regulatory requirements or upon request. I'll now talk about the amendments to the listing rules made in conjunction with the SFC's book building conduct requirements, which apply to new applications made on or after the 5th of August. The listing rule amendments will apply to the same types of offerings as the SFC's book building conduct requirements, reflecting the push for syndicate structures and fee arrangements to be determined at an early stage, as well as the obligations and responsibilities imposed on CMIs and OCs participating in IPOs, including the relevant reporting, publication and disclosure obligations under the book building conduct requirements. However, no specific amendments are made to the listing rules relating to the placing of debt securities, although intermediaries will be expected to comply with the book building conduct requirements standards of conduct relating to debt capital market transactions. Under the SFC Code of Conduct, CMIs and OCs involved in book building and or placing activities in Hong Kong must be appointed under a written agreement before they conduct any specified activities. The written agreement should specify, among other things, their roles and responsibilities, fee arrangements, and fee payment schedules. To reflect this, the listing rules have been amended to include these requirements in the main board listing rules 3A33 and 3A34 and GEM listing rules 6A40 and 6A41. The SFC Code of Conduct also requires OCs to be appointed at an early stage. In the case of an IPO, the OC will need to be appointed no later than 2 weeks after the submission or refiling of the listing application, and in any event before the overall coordinator conducts any specified activities. Of course, this is subject to the additional requirements in relation to the appointment of at least one sponsor OC for main board IPOs at least 2 months prior to submission of the listing application under the sponsor coupling requirement. The listing rule amendments will have introduced corresponding requirements in main board listing rules 3A02, 3A35 to 37 and 3A43 and GEM listing rules 6A42 to 6A43. Sponsor coupling requirement is not, of course, included in the GEM listing rules as it doesn't apply. As I mentioned earlier, as part of the OC's responsibilities, they must advise and guide the issuer and its directors as to their responsibilities under the listing rules, as well as other regulatory requirements or guidance relating to placing activities. OCs are also required to ensure that directors, existing shareholders, their close associates and nominees will only be allocated equity interests in accordance with the listing rules, that the price discovery process is credible and transparent, that the order book has been properly managed, and allocation recommendations made to the company and the final allocation have a proper basis. As part of the listing rule amendments, main board listing rule 3A40 and GEM rule 6A45 requires OCs engaged in connection with an IPO to provide a declaration in the form of new Form E in Appendix 5 or Form I of Appendix 7 for GEM in respect of the issuer's compliance with main board listing rules 808, 1003 and 1004 and GEM listing rules 1123 and 13021. These relate to the relevant requirements for placing and allocations. This was previously provided by the sponsor prior to the commencement of dealings. To assist CMIs in discharging their relevant obligations under the SFC Code of Conduct, as described in the preceding slide, main board listing rules 3A46 and GEM listing rule 6A48 were introduced, and these require written engagements entered into by a listing applicant with each syndicate member to specify the obligations of the listing applicant and its directors to provide the relevant information as soon as practicable, and in any event, at least 4 clear business days before the date of the listing applicant's listing committee hearing. This requirement is also designed to facilitate the OCs complying with the requirements under the SFC Code of Conduct to provide all syndicate members with a list of the directors and existing shareholders of the listing applicant and their respective close associates and any nominees engaged by any of these people for the subscription or purchase of equity securities or interests. The listing rules have also been amended to include new requirements under paragraph 19 of Appendix 6 to the main board listing rules and GEM listing rule 10.16b for the company to document the rationale for its decision on pricing and allocation, particularly where the decision is contrary to the advice or recommendations of the OC. The listing rules also require the OC to inform the SFC and the stock exchange if any decision made by the listing applicant amounts to non-compliance with the listing rules related to the placing activities conducted by it or the listing applicant. This is to complement the OC's responsibility under the SFC Code of Conduct to explain to the listing applicant the potential concerns if, in the case of a share offering, the listing applicant's decision may potentially lead to a lack of open market and an inadequate spread of shareholders, or may negatively affect the orderly and fair trading of the equity interests in the secondary market. Also, the listing applicant is generally expected to make these decisions in accordance with the overall coordinator's advice and recommendations. The new book building conduct requirements have introduced provisions in the SFC Code of Conduct prohibiting CMIs from offering rebates to their investor clients or passing on rebates provided by the listing applicant to their investor clients. Rebates to investor clients through reduction of brokerage commissions are already prohibited under the previous version of the listing rules. However, amendments have been made to enhance the current measures in the listing rules, in particular under Note 2 to Main Board Listing Rule 1208 and Note 3 to GEM Listing Rule 1613. Each new applicant will be required to confirm that no rebate has been provided by it, its controlling shareholders and directors, and the syndicate members to any placees or the public in the announcement of the final offer price and the allotment results of the IPO. Under Marketing Statement Form D in Appendix 5 to the Main Board Listing Rules and Form D in Appendix 5 to the GEM Listing Rules, all OCs, syndicate members and other distributors involved in the IPO are required to certify in writing to the stock exchange that the consideration payable by each placee for the equity interest subscribed in the IPO equals the final offer price determined by the listing application, plus any brokerage, FRC transaction levy, SFC transaction levy, and trading fee payable. New provisions have also been added at Main Board Listing Rule 3A37 and GEM Listing Rule 6A44, which require listing applicants to publish an announcement on the stock exchange's website setting out the names of their OCs on the same date as they file their listing application and publish the application proof, or where applicable on the same date as it files an authorization application with the SFC and publishes the application proof in accordance with Rule 2025. Under Main Board Listing Rule 3A41 and GEM Listing Rule 6A46-2, a further announcement must be published on the appointment of any additional OCs or termination of the engagement of an existing OC. Listing applicants permitted to make a confidential filing with the stock exchange will not be required to announce the name of their OC when they file the listing application, but will be required to publish an announcement naming their OC on the same date as they publish their post-hearing information packs on the stock exchange's website. New provisions have also been added at Note 2 to Main Board Listing Rule 91123A and Note 2 to GEM Listing Rule 1233AA, which requires a sponsor OC for a Main Board IPO or an OC for a GEM IPO to submit certain information mirroring those required under the SFC Code of Conduct to the SFC no less than 4 clear business days prior to the listing committee hearing. This information includes the name of each OC, the fixed fees to be paid by the listing applicant to each OC, the total fees as a percentage of the gross proceeds to be raised from the IPO in respect of both the public subscription and the placing tranches to be paid to all syndicate CMIs, as well as the ratio of fixed and discretionary fees to be paid to the syndicate CMIs in percentage terms. If there are any material changes to the information previously given, the OC must notify the stock exchange together with reasons for the changes as soon as practicable. This requirement mirrors the corresponding requirement under the revised SFC Code of Conduct. The amended listing rules also require new applicants to disclose in the listing document the total fees as a percentage of the gross amount of funds proposed to be raised in the subscription tranche and/or the placing tranche, and the ratio of fixed and discretionary fees paid or payable to the syndicate members. This requirement is set out at paragraph 3B of Appendices 1A and 1E to the Main Board Rules and paragraph 3B of Appendix 1A to the GEM Rules. Under the declaration in paragraph 10A of Form F in Appendix 5 to the Main Board Rules and paragraph 10A of Form E in Appendix 5 to the GEM Rules, before dealings commence, listing applicants must confirm the determination of the allocation of discretionary fees in absolute amount and the payment schedule for the total fees payable to syndicate capital market intermediaries no later than listing. For already listed companies, a new requirement has been introduced at Main Board Listing Rule 3A41.1 and 9.10b and GEM Listing Rule 6A46.1 and 1208, which require any change in the OC to be reported to the stock exchange as soon as practicable. Under the listing rules, separate marketing statements must also be submitted to the stock exchange before commencement of dealings. Now I'll talk about the other amendments made to the listing rules which don't relate to the book building conduct requirements. These are mainly amendments to reflect the stock exchange's current unification of the Main Board and GEM websites. There are also some amendments relating to other housekeeping matters. Regarding the website unification, prior to 28 May 2022, the Main Board and GEM had separate websites with certain information only accessible on the relevant website. For example, historical market statistics for GEM were only available on the GEM website. The exchange has already made most of the information for both Mainboard and GEM listed companies available on the Stock Exchange's corporate website and or the Hong Kong Exchange's news website. So to streamline access to market information, the exchange has unified the Mainboard and GEM websites, and the technical infrastructure is being updated. The exchange says that unification will align the Stock Exchange's corporate branding and reduce redundant technical infrastructure cost. All the material information on GEM website has been migrated and merged with the Stock Exchange's corporate website and or the exchange's news website, except for information which is outdated or duplicated. A separate section is now dedicated to GEM on the Stock Exchange's corporate website and the Hong Kong Exchange's news website, where the public may access, among other information, daily quotes of GEM listed issuers, new listing information of GEM new applicants, and progress reports of GEM new listing applications. Corporate communications, disclosure of interest notices, and other information previously published on the Hong Kong Exchange's news website in relation to GEM issuers and application proofs, PHIPs, and related materials of GEM new applicants will continue to be available for public access at the same locations on the Hong Kong Exchange's website. To complement the Mainboard and GEM site website merging, all references to GEM website and the GEM listing rules has been changed to Exchange's website. Finally, the remaining amendments to the listing rules relate to adding electronic bank transfers and additional means of payment of listing fees, introducing a new headline category to facilitate search of company information sheets published by issuers on the Stock Exchange's website, and rectifying clerical errors and simplifying certain provisions by using plain language where appropriate. All of these amendments also came into effect on the 5th of August 2022. So that brings me to the end of the formal part of this webinar. Thank you very much for joining me. Bye.